Pension plan reform is an issue that can strain employee-employer relationships. A move from a defined benefit plan to a defined contribution plan can lead to the next picket line. I'm here at Hicks Morley's Toronto office to speak to Terra Klinck about the future of pensions in Canada. Terra heads the office's Pension and Benefit Practice Group, who advise on pension changes and restructuring, as well as providing insight to the current market.
It was in the 1960s that the pension legislation was introduced, and employers had to start funding these defined benefit promises. And then for a number of years, and throughout the 80s in particular, these plans had, very large surpluses. And then over the past 10 or so years, we've seen staggering deficits in defined benefit plans. And there's a whole host of reasons. A defined benefit plan, just to step back for a moment, as I said before, it is a fixed formula, and an actuary from time to time has to value or determine how much the employer has to put in that plan to fund that formula. So the actuary at a point in time takes a look at the assets and the liabilities of the plan. So you'll see where I'm going. The 2008 meltdown caused a large hit to the assets in defined benefit plans, but there's also important developments on the liability side. And there's a number of factors. First being that interest rates have been very low for a long time. And the low interest rates causes liabilities to rise. And we haven't seen long-term interest rates as low as we have for such a prolonged period of time ever since I've been involved in the industry. So that's a really important development that's causing liabilities to increase. But we also have an aging workforce. So we have many large plans where there's more retirees than there are active employees to support a plan. And then thirdly, it's this longevity issue. We have employees living, or former employees, retirees, living much longer than it was originally anticipated. So they're drawing a pension for a longer period of time. So it's not one factor, but all these factors together are causing the deficits that you read about in the newspapers.
So what went wrong with DB plans?
Part of the problem is that the Income Tax Act puts limits on how much you can contribute to a pension plan. So in good times, even if there was a surplus, the Income Tax Act said you can't continue to put money in a plan. The other problem is that the way the legal landscape has developed was that when surpluses arose, in most cases, because of old trust law principles, employers were having to share surplus. So they weren't entitled to surplus. And that causes a disincentive to make sure your plan's fully funded or funded in excess. So I think those two factors, really inhibited employers leaving these surpluses in these plans. It was really an incentive to fund at a lower level.
So is there any way that DB plans can be salvaged?
It's a fundamental, design decision for employers wanting to maintain a DB plan. And some employers are committed to the DB model. They think it's good for employees. But I think what we'll see is employers trying to reduce risk. So I think we'll see lower benefit levels if a DB plan is maintained. I think we'll also see employers wanting employees to share more of the cost. So we'll see increased employee contributions.
Why do employers seem to be favoring DC plans?
Well, DC plans, the contribution rate under that plan is fixed. So, I was explaining all these reasons why DB plans are underfunded. Those are all a funding risk. And year over year, an employer's not going to know what their contributions are to that plan. And as life expectancy increases, that's going to increase the funding of a plan in the future. Whereas a defined contribution plan, the contributions are fixed. So really what that does for employers is it mitigates the risk, their funding risk, their money that needs to go into the pension plan.
Can you maybe explain to me some other pension possibilities?
The first plan I would mention is called the target benefit plan. The pension formula is not fixed, it's a target. So there's oftentimes it's described as, there's a corridor of a pension promise that is being that's the goal of the benefit to be provided under the plan, and the employer contribution is fixed. So it's more of the idea is that benefits can be reduced if there's in fact not enough money to pay for the promised benefit. So it's taking away some of the risk to the employer in these funding risks that I've talked about earlier. The target benefit plan was formally introduced in the Ontario legislation just at the end of 2010. So the legislation is now, it provides for target benefit plans, but we don't have the regulations to know the details. The second type of pension plan I talk about is the jointly sponsored pension plan. A jointly sponsored pension plan, the idea is that the employer and the employees are jointly responsible for funding the plan on an ongoing basis, but also for funding deficits. And I guess the trade-off for the joint funding is that there's joint governance. And the Ontario legislation has just been introduced, has just been amended to provide that jointly sponsored pension plans do not need to be funded on a solvency or terminal basis as ongoing plans do. So the idea is that employees and employers together manage this pension plan. They agree upon the funding, they agree upon the governance, and the benefits under that plan can be reduced if there's insufficient assets. Another one of the alternative new arrangements that you hear about is the pooled retirement pension plan. And it is a defined contribution plan, but the idea is that plan would be administered by a financial institution. And the federal government put out a framework in December 2010, but we don't have all the details. But conceptually, it's that a financial institution would be the administrator of that plan. Employers can choose to participate. It may be that employers without another plan are required to participate and could opt out, but that it will expand coverage. And employers will be able to choose different contribution levels. And there'll be some administrative responsibility, but certainly far less responsibility than they face today if they have a defined contribution pension plan. And the idea is that the cost of running this plan would be lower. And of course, lower costs mean higher account balances at retirement. So again, the federal government has introduced a framework, and it's being talked about at all the provinces. There's been discussion papers setting out the details, but that's certainly another alternative that would be certainly expand coverage and be very widespread.